very much. Especially for this really nice and I'm sure promising introduction. The background for this introduction is in fact that I made some kind of criticism about strategies of the Green movement in Germany and also the development of the Green Party through the last 3 decades in the context of a book and in the context of some public discussions. And I can explain this to you because this goes directly to the question of storytelling. But I can assure you that I'm very sympathetic with the Green movement and not so sympathetic with the development it took in Germany because it moved very much into a very technocratic direction and it changed its political aims and the political goals from something like following the idea of a new society that has a different way of using what is given there with resources and also with lifestyles to something that is highly mainstream and to some kind of wanting technical solutions for keeping the lifestyle. And the main topic of this is green growth. This is a big thing here in Germany. And what I would say is that green growth is something like pink growth or blue growth or gray growth or normal growth. It is nothing different because there's this adjective green in this context doesn't make any sense because capitalist growth societies and growth economy cannot be green and cannot be sustainable. This is the principal point. But with this mainstreaming process, there have been a lot of problems that have also impact on what people think about how societies, modern societies, can be changed, and in fact, what the goal of trying to change modern societies is. And I think the goal is not keeping these societies as they are, only greener, but they have to be totally different in many respects. And the central point of this is not following this path of having more of everything, but having less of everything, especially, of course, in the rich societies like the Western European societies or the United States or others. And this is the central point of storytelling, because I think what is not on the political agenda yet is why we want this other type of society, and what the relationship of this new society, the good society, if you may, what the relationship of this type of society is to the conventional society that we all come from. And the problem is that with a capitalist economy, that this was not something unsuccessful, and not even unsuccessful in the moral or normative context that we are talking about. Because capitalist economy was, especially in the early industrialized societies, an economy that provided all kinds of immaterial goods and achievements, like freedom, like democracy, like legal state, like social security in the Western European societies, like an education system, and things like that, like a health system. And all this was achieved with a type of economy that was built on continuous growth. And the promise that was especially made by politicians in the post-war era was that we can have something like lower social conflicts if we have this growth economy, and everybody, even the workers and the people who are not part of the working system and the labor system, have the chance to lead an okay life. on a relatively high standard, especially compared to the so-called third world societies and whatever. This was the promise of the capitalist system in the post-war area to avoid the social conflicts that people thought of being responsible for the totalitarian developments that took place in the first half of the 20th century. This was the idea. And this was then the idea of a democratic capitalism, which, as you all know, lost something of its former idea and former normative legitimation by turning into this new neoliberal capitalism, which has nothing to do with this type of democratic capitalism. But what really the problem, what is the problem in my perspective is that we now have the task to keep this type of civilizatory standard containing these goods like democracy, freedom, etc., with an economy and with cultural practices and a lifestyle that uses factor 5 to 10 less resources and energy than we have now. And the crucial point is that nobody knows how to do this. Because what we know, because we are all part of this history of the development of this type of economy that has now spread almost over all countries in the world, that we come from this system and that we share, as people who have been socialized under the ideas and the conditions of this type of economy, that we share also the way of problem solving, of solutions of problems, that we share the perceptions, how problems are defined, that we share the language of this capitalist technocratic societies and whatever. So to explain this a little bit, because this goes directly to the problem and the technique of storytelling, is that we in Germany, with the context of Energiewende, this famous huge project to have 100% or 80% renewable energy system here in Germany, all the words that are used in this context come from the fossil society. There's always talking about, people talk always about Leitplanken. I don't know the English word for this. What is Leitplanken? These are the things on the Autobahn, yeah? And they have the function that if you have an accident, there are these Leitplanken to at least have something that it's not so bad as if you don't have them. So, and if you look at all the papers and all the political speeches, everything is full of these categories of fossil society. And if you look at the solutions that people try to develop in this context of this cultural model, you will always find solutions that would never question the basic principles. You will always find solutions that go into the direction of, for example, heightening efficiency of products and so on, of production processes, things like that. Or replacing a traditional energy providing system with these beautiful renewable energies and things like that. And the problem is, there's nothing bad about renewable energies. But as long as you keep the basic cultural system and the basic economic system, if you have 100% renewable energies, you have not any kind of order or restriction against the total extraction process that takes place already now, but then even more. Renewables only make sense if you have a culture that has another idea of what life is about, what culture is about, whatever. So renewables make only sense if you have a culture of less, not a culture of more. And as we know from history, and this is also a problem how this eco-movement in Germany and other European societies has developed, if you look at history, you always have the phenomenon that if you have a new energy regime, like changing to fossil energy, this comes as an addition, not as a substitution. And this makes perfect sense, because as long as you have a growth economy, you will use everything that you can get to fulfill your goal to produce surplus and all these things. So why substituting energy if you can have more energy? And the other thing is, and it's of course part of the problem, if we think of an Energiewende in terms that the heightening rates, that the increased rates of the use of energy are still part of the project. Yeah? That people think, okay, we will have 5%, 10% more energy use per year, therefore we have to build a renewable energy system this is bigger than the one before. So these are all small examples for that the strategies are not diverging from the path that this type of society has already developed, but still finds itself in the same model, in the same way of storytelling, in the same way of ideas, only that it seems to be green. But there's nothing green about it. There's absolutely nothing green about it. So, as the basher of the Green Party, I would say, it would be also nice to have an historical reflection on the origins of the eco-movement, because in the beginning, after the Limits to Growth by Dennis Meadows and others, there were of course many people thinking about society, not about technology. And if they thought about technology, they thought about a new way of using technology in the context of another societies, like authors like Ivan Illich or André Gortz or others. And this seems to have totally disappeared from the perspective of the political thinkers of today. So, and history is very helpful when we try to think about the way we understand ourselves and how we came to understand ourselves in this way, to understand what type of story a society like this is telling about itself and about us, and then to develop ideas of how another story can be told, a counter-narrative to the story that everybody in this type of society is telling about himself and his society. And again, coming back to the beginning of this short talk, the story that this type of society is telling is a very strong story, because it was not only ideology that this type of economy would provide more goods or better wealth or better health, but this was proven by the changing of the living standards of people. This was proven by the bettering of the health standards and all these things. So people have a real experience that this type of growth economy did something to them. And this experience is of course reproduced now in many parts of the world, as it is then materialized in cars, autobahnen, and TV sets and all these things, in the very same way as in the Western European societies after the war. So heightening material living standards is something that proves the story that is told, the story of that growth is better than non-growth, and that progress is always there, and progress consists in the ever-given opportunity to have more of everything, that this story is not only ideology, but it's something that has a correlation in the real-life experience of people. So therefore, this story is very strong. It's a very strong story. And the story is especially strong because it's not only there in words or written narratives or whatever, but it's there in the infrastructures of the respective societies. Every autobahn tells a story about mobility. Every gas station, every airport, every shopping mall tells a story about how we live and how we should live, and that it's good to live in that way. Yeah? And I'm not only a basher of the Green Party, but a social psychologist, and therefore very interested how people make sense out of their lives and out of reality. And the very crucial point is that most of what people think, including us, is not going through the reflective and cognitive processes, but we think what we think because we live in a society that has provided us with a certain perspective of what that reality is. And the proof of this perspective is everyday life, where everything is like everyday else. And everybody thinks what everybody else thinks. And this is not a normative statement, that is an empirical statement. So the belief in enlightenment and in giving information and committing information about the status of the world and how things can be better with diagrams and PowerPoint presentations and whatever is not very successful, for the simple reason that people experience their lived reality in a different way. The only thing that you can achieve with diagrams and complicated books and scientific results is something for the scientists who can use it because they have a context to use it, or something for the public that can be used as good material for party talks, conversations when you have nothing more interesting to talk about, and things like that. Yeah, because the very important thing is, and this is what people don't realize normally, is that you can really, in societies of our type, who be based on the division of labor, that means they base on very different roles that each of us has to fulfill every day, which means if you grow up in a society like this, you learn how to be contradictory, how to not mix up the different roles, how to behave in one role in that way and in the next role in the other way. So therefore, it is absolutely no surprise that you can know something in a certain realm or role that you are in and make no transfer or use of it in another role. This is what we normally do. So people can really know a lot about climate change and CO2 emissions and things like that. But they have there's no correlation of this knowledge with, for example, the task that they have to fulfill when they try to bring their kids to the kindergarten. Yeah? And then they use, for example, an SUV because it makes sense for them, because they like security or status or whatever. So they bring their kids with an SUV to the Waldorf kindergarten in Germany, vote for the Green Party and know a lot about climate change. But there is no subjective need for them to bring these things together, because there is no format in this type of societies to bring these things together. Because for most of the people it is sufficient to be concerned about the problem. It's sufficient to be concerned. But this doesn't mean at all that you have to implement this thought, these reflections, this concern into your professional work, into your everyday life or whatever. It is enough to be concerned. Yeah? And this is also an explanation for the development of this eco-movement and green movement in Germany, because in a society and an economy that is based on the division of labor, and capitalism is a very, very smart economic system, it was, of course, kind of natural that we establish another subsystem. And the subsystem is where most of us are parts of. It is the concern industry, where we all take part in being concerned and making kind of jobs and actions and things like that out of it. So, and the problem we have is that we have in the Western societies an impressive amount of people who are concerned about the planet and the climate system and things like that. But it doesn't do anything in terms of their everyday practices, of the professional practices, the ideas about mobility, and so on and so on. And the proof of this is that you, for example, have incredible growth rates in the participation in international climate conferences. 1995, when there was the first international climate conference in Berlin, there were delegates, I think 757 delegates from 170 countries. In Doha, it was 16,500, plus 6,500 from NGOs, plus 1,500 from the press and the media. So this is growth, isn't it? It's very, very good for the airlines, it's very good for the hotellerie, it's very good for the catering services, for the taxi services, for all kinds of things that you need when you are in a conference business. The only thing that it was not good for was the climate. And be sure, in Warsaw it will be the same. So you see with these examples that we always, as long as we keep staying in the same cultural model, we will always heightening the efforts, and doing everything in the same line, and have the idea that we already have changed something because we changed the content. The content is not important, practice is important. So therefore the idea is that we developed, and which ended up with this foundation, Future Perfect, is the idea that we should turn the communicative mode into a totally different direction. That we should not talk about the destructive strategies of companies, that we should not talk about the terrible status of the planet, that we should not talk about climate change and things like that, because everybody does it. There's no necessity for this anymore. Everybody knows this. And to turn the thing totally into another direction in talking about what can be done to change a society without a negative reasoning for this. For example, you can find it very good to have a modern city without cars. And you don't need a single argument that is based on climate change to make the argument that a city without cars is better than a city with cars. It's very easy. You just have to walk 100 meters through a city like this and have the imagination that this city without cars would be a much better city. But not only in terms of that you feel better, but as a public space, as a space for political reasoning, as a space for having new ideas about how to live and whatever. And this you can apply to all kinds of arguments. It is much more useful to tell a story about what type of society we want to live in. Wie wir leben wollen. How we want to live. And what kind of things we have to do to achieve a society that seems to us much more attractive than the one we have. And this is not to be based on a negative argument, especially if these negative arguments have become part of normal communication, because at least in Germany or Austria or Switzerland, everybody knows that the whole thing is totally terrible and there's too much waste and too much energy, but it doesn't change anything anymore. It was different in the beginning of this movement, but now it's completely normal conversation. Everybody would be totally surprised if there would be some good news about the environment in a newspaper. You know, nobody is surprised about the latest news about the melting of the glacier and that it's worse than in the prognosis. Everybody finds it quite normal, turns the pages and says, oh God, oh God. But they would be completely surprised if there would be something that it was a failure with climate change. Everybody failed, the whole IPCC was wrong. And so nobody would believe it. Everybody would think, oh, yeah, what is this? 1st of April or what? Yeah? So everybody is expecting the bad news about this. 5 minutes, okay. So the idea is to start telling a counter-narrative. A counter-narrative to the narrative that this type of story is telling about itself, the conventional success story, and also a counter-narrative to this apocalyptic, catastrophic type of story that we are used to. To have something where people can develop ideas of what can be done within the given context. So what we do in the foundation Future Perfect is simply something like an investigative journalistic work that we search for projects and single persons and initiatives and so who already started to develop a different type of economy, a different type of energy production, and all the things where we think that makes sense if we want to develop a Model B that is very different from the Model A society where we come from. Because, as I said in the beginning, I think we don't know how a modern sustainable society will look like. Nobody knows that. So the task is to find pathways towards the directions of a sustainable modern society. And we think that these projects that are already there give us many things that are very useful. First of all, they are something like real-life experiments. What can be done in terms of transition and transformation of lifestyles, productive styles, consumerism, and so. So this is something where we can really learn a lot. Yeah? But if we start to tell stories about these persons who do these things, we have a beautiful material where people can read or see. We also do films about these projects, see it or get access to this type of stories and think, well, this is not a hermetic society that we live in. There's room to maneuver, people can do something. And this is not just a saying or something, it's not just an idea, but it's very concrete because there are these real life persons who do real things and make experiences with it. Sometimes bad, most of the time good experience. And part of the good experience is that they not only change something in the society, but that they also have the experience to change themselves. Because this is the very important point, to make this immediate transfer of your ideas of what you do to the way you behave yourself and how you feel yourself. This is what is missing in the normal way of talking about the things. And the third aspect of storytelling, of telling good stories about concrete projects of another type of modernity, is that these stories, these are of course very small stories. Some of them are a little bit bigger, like the story of the community gardens, but that we can use the small stories as elements for composing a counter-narrative of a bigger format. Yeah? This narrative of a sustainable modern society, because we only have some segments of a story like this, but not the whole story. And I appreciate this because I appreciate that we don't have a master plan of this new society, because experience of the 20th century with master plans of other types of societies was not so good, this experience. So we have to develop something with the freedom to fail, with the freedom of new combinations, with the freedom of using things and trying to follow it as long as possible until they prove themselves as being successful or not successful. So it's not so much about a transition to another society, but many transitions. And it's not so much about changing everything, but much about a new combination of things that we can use from habits, behavior, strategies of the conventional society and combine it with these new strategies. And what is really interesting is how people do react when they learn about stories like this. Our foundation was opened in March last year, and we started with 80 stories to tell on our website, and relatively soon published a book about these things. And the acknowledgement and the recognition of these stories is really high in Germany. And the recognition of this foundation, although it's very small, was really surprisingly high. All the media was reporting about it. The idea that you can tell good stories seemed very fascinating to people because they are all used to bad stories, and all the media is, of course, living off bad stories. So, and then we made collaborations with public television, and we produced films together about these projects and people, which is really good because people like to see the small films and get an impression of what people do. And we have a collaboration with a very prominent newspaper in Germany, a very conservative one, the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, because the idea of this storytelling is to penetrate or perforate the society. You know, this story that it's telling about itself and saying, okay, this is not really true. There are other elements, yeah? And to not having the idea that you can change immediately everything, but to say there is another reality. The reality that you are talking about is only one version, but there can be another one, and we have elements for this. So, and the last sentence I want to say is that we are now, this, what the work we did, what is that? Perforating the talk. Okay. We did this in the last 1.5 years only in German. This means we only reported and made stories that come from Austria, from Germany, and from Switzerland, for the simple reason that we understood ourselves as a learning group, because we had no idea how to write these things, how to bring it to the people, and whatever. So now, as it seems to be kind of attractive to people and has also some very concrete results that things are, was ist nachgemacht? Copied, yeah, that's because people find it attractive and say, okay, we can do this also. So there's this kind, not even a communicative success, but also very practical success. We now make the step to become international, and now it's then not Futur 2, as the German title is, but Future Perfect. And Luise Tremel, who is also part of the foundation Futur 2, is here, and if you want to be part of the International Future Perfect project, it is very, very good to talk to Luise, because she's longer here than I will be, and she knows everything much better than I do. This is also very good in this respect. Yeah, and this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.